Get a second here and talk to us a little bit about who we are as your audience in the topic of ethical leadership in healthcare.
All right. The way that we had set up our presentation, which will also be briefly addressed in the first minute of actual presenting, is that we are a group of consultants who have been brought in to deal with the issue that we're going to, again, briefly address at the beginning, and you all are the AOL Board of Directors that we're presenting to.
Wonderful. Welcome, and please begin.
All right. Hello everyone, my name is Michaela Young and I'm a member of the consulting team from the University of Florida. I would like to first thank you all for bringing us on to present a solution to the issue that's about to be discussed. Now, to give a bit of background information, in February of 2014, so only a few short months ago, AOL CEO Tim Armstrong presented a change that was going to be happening in the 401k policy of AOL to his employees. Essentially what this change was that he was going to be transitioning from making monthly matching contributions to making a single lump sum annual contribution. Now this change in itself was controversial, but where additional controversy came from was the method of announcement and justification of this issue that Tim Armstrong employed. He gave a speech to a large number of his assembled employees in which he blamed additional healthcare costs that were going to be incurred as a result of the Affordable Health Care Act. But additionally, he blamed healthcare costs that were incurred as a result of two, quote, distressed babies born to members of the AOL family during the last calendar year, and the costs associated with those babies and their care for the change he was going to be making in employee benefit plans. This, again, was a controversial change and a controversial method of announcement, which was not received well by employees or the public. And that's why we're here today, is to discuss this issue and what AOL needs to do moving forward, and really what the issues at the core of this whole situation were. Now, before we go any further, we think it's important to have a working definition of what the purpose of ethics is in business before we progress into an actual analysis, which would be described as ameliorating suffering and promoting virtue and ameliorating suffering and promoting value for stakeholders and shareholders. And now, in order to further discuss this definition as it applies to the situation at hand is my colleague Katie.
Hello, I'm going to briefly discuss the benefit plan and the speech that Tim Armstrong makes, and as well as the implication for stakeholders. So beginning with the benefit plan, under the IRS reporting requirements, it is perfectly legal to change from a 401k monthly matching contribution to a lump sum program, and in fact, many companies are indeed doing this. But it leads us to the question, is this an ethical choice? Because the implications of the lump sum program are that if you leave, you lose. You leave before December 31st and you receive none of your employer contributions to your 401k. And so this submits our employees to the bear market trap that you might be leaving, or presumably you're going to stay until December 31st to try to receive these earnings that your employer is matching. But if you leave at the end of the year, we might be forcing our employees to leave in a down market and forcing them to invest in a bad market, and therefore jeopardizing their livelihood. And now you have the fact that people who leave before December 31st earn none of the money that they're using for retirement, for their lives when they're older. And so are we respecting these people? One part of our definition of ethics is to respect for the persons. And so we would argue that we indeed are not respecting the people by changing this program, because we are not respecting their livelihood in the future. And so we then move into the speech. And the speech, when it was initially delivered, people were kind of upset and said, did it violate any legal acts? And the question was, maybe it had possibly violated the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, otherwise known as HIPAA. And in fact, Tim Armstrong did not violate HIPAA, because there were several standard identifiers in the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 164, and he did not disclose any of these identifiers. And so we then move into, he's acting legally, but is he acting ethically? And again, we're forced to come to the answer of no, he is not. Ethics has something to do with ameliorating suffering, like we pointed out in the beginning. And by creating this fear environment of blaming a family's baby for changes to the entire corporation, who's to say what family's next? This is not the first public gaffe of Tim Armstrong in which he creates fear amongst his employees. And so he is not acting ethically, again, according to our analysis. And so we move into the implications for stakeholders. Tim Armstrong has a duty to create value and use virtue to create value for these stakeholders. in his company, which are also included in stakeholders, are shareholders, people who are financially vested in this company. And so by creating this loss of trust by these statements and this bad publicity, which is forever amongst the internet and other other companies, Tim Armstrong is not fulfilling his duties. And further to discuss the role of CEO and management versus leadership is my colleague Terry.
So we're going to propose a solution, which would be ethical leadership. But before we discuss ethical leadership, it's important that we differentiate between what management is and what leadership is. It's important to stress the fact that as CEO, your job is to manage the company strategically, and Tim Armstrong is doing a great job managing. Management involves strategic decisions, coping with complexity, planning, organizing, and controlling the day-to-day functions of an organization, which Tim Armstrong is doing arguably well. However, leadership deals with inspiring, aligning, and motivating your employees towards a common vision or ideal. When we talk about leadership, we talk about coping with change. And when we make that distinction, we can see that Tim Armstrong has his faults with regards to leadership. And we would argue that the best form of leadership is ethical leadership. And when we talk about ethical leadership, we talk about two things: what we do as a leader and how we are as a leader, which we refer to your character. And when we talk about what we do as a leader, we talk about two things: respecting the persons, as my colleagues just mentioned, and the intelligent pursuit of self-interest. So when we talk about respecting the persons, we're talking about operating from a standpoint where you understand that these stakeholders are human beings with families, and that you take these decisions, these factors into consideration when you make these decisions. That these employees aren't just cogs within the corporate machine, but they're actually people that we need to respect. And we talk about pursuing intelligent self-interest. We talk about not just making short-sighted decisions just for profit, but taking into consideration that we're here to promote value for all stakeholders in the organization. And that looks like less corruption, because people are less inclined to make unethical decisions when they're just trying to maximize profit. They're looking at value for everybody. And the second part of this, not just what you do, but how you are, is virtue theory. And before we go into virtue theory, which is a theory created by Aristotle, I want to say that Tim Armstrong is obviously not respecting the persons when he's choosing to blame these changes in 401k plan on distressed babies. And he's obviously not trying to pursue intelligent self-interest when he's changing 401k benefit plans, which is negatively impacting his employees. Now, when we talk about virtue theory, Aristotle mentioned something called the golden mean, which means it's appropriate to act in moderation. One example would be courage, right? So acting in excess of courage means to act with rashness, and to act in deficiency of courage means to act in cowardice. And it's clear that Tim Armstrong is acting in cowardice when he's choosing to blame distressed babies for a hike in healthcare costs in his company. What we propose is to promote virtuous character within the organization, and to speak more about that is my colleague Michaela.
Now, taking what Terry began to address concerning virtue and the importance of promoting virtue within a company and corporate decision-making, we're going to propose a three-pronged approach, a three-part model of suggestions to be implemented that we think would help AOL to move forward in the best way possible and to be able to make the best and soundest decisions moving forward. Now, the first part of this three-pronged approach would be virtue development. Included within virtue development would be, first of all, simply allowing Tim Armstrong the opportunity and the resources and guidance to reflect on the decisions that he makes and the words that he's using and the way that this will affect people and the people's perception of him and his company as well. Additionally, implementing a mentorship program in which older, more established members of the AOL company would be matched with younger, newer employees, and the virtues and values that have been instilled throughout the corporate structure can therefore be better passed on to new employees to make sure that they're understood throughout the entire corporate structure. And these two things together would help promote just good decision making and build the proper habits so that this will be carried on into the future. The second part of this three-pronged approach then would be increased employee feedback. It's important that the employees who are putting incredible amounts of time and effort into a company and who are an integral part of that company's success to feel that their concerns are being heard. So having the employees feel that their concerns are being heard and allowing them to give feedback would also help promote positive growth in AOL. And lastly, but certainly not least, would be communication. That is arguably where the greatest breakdown was in this whole debacle that AOL found themselves in, is the fact that there was ineffective communication between the executive and his employees. So if that communication can be mended, and if he can communicate in a more efficient method and a more favorable method in the future, we feel that AOL will be in a fantastic position to continue the positive growth that it has known and to be the company that we know it can be. We thank you very much for your time and your consideration of our solutions. Thank you.